The rusty gates slammed shut behind Cordelia Winters with a sound like a gunshot, and she wondered if it was an omen. Standing before her loomed the most enormous man she'd ever seen, easily 7 feet tall, with shoulders that could block out the sun and hands that looked capable of crushing rocks. His weathered face bore 3 jagged scars running from his left temple to his jaw, and his storm-gray eyes held nothing but warning as he studied her with obvious disapproval. "Turn around and ride back to town, lady," the giant growled, his voice like distant thunder, "before you end up like the others." Cordelia clutched her carpet bag tighter, her knuckles white against the worn leather. She'd traveled 300 miles from Boston after answering his newspaper advertisement for a housekeeper, spending her last $20 on train fare. There was no going back, not to the creditors, not to the shame, not to the empty rooms where her father's gambling debts had stripped away everything she'd ever known. "Ow! Mr. Bronson Thorne, I presume?" She lifted her chin, meeting his intimidating gaze despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm here about the position. Did you not read the warnings?" His massive frame stepped closer, close enough that she had to crane her neck to maintain eye contact. "Every woman who's worked this ranch is dead. Every single one." The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds skittering across the dusty yard like fleeing spirits. Cordelia could see the remnants of what had once been a prosperous spread, the main house with its sagging porch, the barn with its door hanging by a single hinge, the corrals empty except for shadows and regret. "How many?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "7, in the past 3 years. His scarred face twisted into something that might have been pain. "Good women, all of them. The first was my wife." Cordelia's breath caught. The newspaper advertisement had mentioned nothing about his marital status, only that the position required a woman of strong constitution and stronger nerve. What happened to them? Bronson's jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck standing out like iron cables. Accidents. Falls down the stairs. Kicked by horses, snake bites, the well collapsed on one. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It's like this place is cursed, and I'm the fool who keeps bringing lambs to slaughter." Despite the terror clawing at her throat, Cordelia found herself studying him more carefully. Beneath the intimidating exterior, she glimpsed something unexpected, genuine anguish. This wasn't a man who took pleasure in frightening women away. This was a man haunted by loss, trying desperately to prevent another tragedy. "Why do you keep advertising for help if you believe the ranch is cursed?" He gestured toward the deteriorating buildings around them. "Because I can't maintain 12,000 acres alone. Cattle are dying, the crops are failing, and the bank comes calling every month." His scarred hands clenched into fists. "But I won't have another death on my conscience. So get back on that horse, and forget you ever heard of Thornfield Ranch." Cordelia glanced at the setting sun, painting the western sky blood red. Night was falling, and the nearest town was a brutal 15-mile ride through territory known for bandits and wild animals. More importantly, she had nowhere else to go. "I'll take the job," she said quietly. Bronson Thorne stared at her as if she'd declared her intention to sprout wings and fly. "Did you hear nothing I just said?" "I heard every word." She straightened her shoulders. "And I still need the work." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the mournful whistle of wind through the gaps in the barn walls. Bronson's scarred face cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked disturbingly like resignation. "You're either the bravest woman I've ever met," he said slowly, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Cordelia admitted. "But I'm also desperate, Mr. Thorne, and desperate people don't have the luxury of superstition." He studied her with those penetrating gray eyes, taking in her worn traveling dress, the careful patches she'd made invisible with skillful needlework, the proud tilt of her chin that couldn't quite hide the exhaustion shadowing her face. He spoke again. His voice had lost some of its harsh edge. "What's your story, Miss Winters? Cordelia Winters?" She met his gaze steadily. "My father left me nothing but debts when he died. The bank took our house in Boston 3 weeks ago, along with everything in it. I have exactly 4 cents to my name, and nowhere to go. Something flickered across his features, understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred desperation. And you think risking your life for $60 a month is better than destitution? I think starving in the street is a certainty, while your curse might just be a string of terrible coincidences. She gestured toward the house. May I see? Where I'd be working. Bronson's massive frame seemed to deflate slightly, against my better judgment. He turned toward the main house, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each heavy step. But we establish rules. You don't go out after dark, ever. You don't approach the well without me present. You stay away from the stallions in the far pasture, and if anything feels wrong, you come find me immediately. The interior of the house revealed the extent of its neglect. Dust covered every surface like gray snow, cobwebs draped the corners, and the floorboards creaked ominously under their feet. But beneath the grime, Cordelia could see the bones of what had once been a magnificent home hand-carved banisters. Imported wallpaper, fixtures that spoke of wealth and care. Your wife decorated this? She asked, running her fingers along. The mantelpiece. Bronson's face hardened again. Zadora had dreams for this place. She wanted to fill it with children and laughter. His voice turned bitter. Instead, it became her tomb. They climbed the stairs to the second floor, where he showed her a small bedroom with a window facing east. The mattress was old but clean, the wash basin cracked but functional. It was spartanly furnished but infinitely better than the boarding house room she'd been living in. This was Isadora's sewing room, he said quietly. She'd sit by that window. Every morning, working on baby clothes we'd never need. The pain in his voice was so raw that Cordelia found herself stepping closer without thinking. How long were you married? 2 years? She fell down these very stairs on a winter morning, broke her neck. His hands gripped the doorframe so tightly she thought the wood might splinter. Found her at the bottom, still holding the breakfast. Tray she'd been bringing me? I'm sorry for your loss, he laughed, but it was a sound devoid of humor. Save your sympathy, Miss Winters. You'll need it for yourself if you're truly determined to stay. They returned to the kitchen, where he showed her the pump that drew water from the well, the cast-iron stove that would require constant feeding, the pantry stocked with enough canned goods to survive a siege. As the tour concluded, full darkness had settled over the ranch like a heavy blanket. I'll sleep in the barn tonight, Bronson said. Give you time to reconsider this madness. There's nothing to reconsider. Cordelia set her carpet bag on the kitchen table. I'll start tomorrow. At dawn, he paused at the door, his massive silhouette filling the frame. Miss Winters, ... Cordelia. I meant what I said about the curse. Something about this place kills women. I don't understand it, can't explain it, but I've buried too many good souls to dismiss it as coincidence. Then perhaps, she said softly, what this place needs isn't another victim, but someone strong enough to break the pattern. Dawn broke gray and cold over Thornfield Ranch, and Cordelia woke to the sound of something large moving around the kitchen below. Her heart lurched as she remembered where she was, and more importantly, with whom. She dressed quickly in her oldest work dress and braided her dark hair into a practical knot before venturing downstairs. Bronson stood at the stove, his enormous frame somehow managing to look graceful as he flipped eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He'd changed from yesterday's dusty clothes into clean denim and a blue work shirt that emphasized the impossible breadth of his shoulders. In the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, his scars looked less fearsome and more like evidence of a man who'd survived something terrible. You're still here, he said without turning around. Did you expect me to flee in the night? Hoped for it. He transferred eggs and bacon onto 2 plates. Coffee's on the table. They ate in companionable silence, and Cordelia found herself studying him covertly. Without the intimidating scowl of yesterday, his face was actually quite handsome in a rugged way. His hair was dark brown, shot through with premature silver, and when he wasn't glowering, his gray eyes held unexpected warmth. Tell me about the other women, she said as she refilled their coffee cups. His fork paused, halfway to his mouth. Why torture yourself with those details? Because if I'm going to break this supposed curse, I need to understand what I'm dealing with. Bronson set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, which creaked alarmingly under his weight. Isadora died. I tried to manage alone for 6 months. Nearly killed myself and the ranch both. Finally hired Millicent Hartwell, a widow from town. She lasted 3 weeks before her horse threw her into the creek, drowned in 2 feet of water. Cordelia felt a chill despite the warm kitchen and the others. Prudence Ashby fell through the hayloft, floor-broken beam gave way beneath her. Constance Moore was bitten by a rattlesnake that had never been seen before or since in these parts. Felicity Brennan. He paused, his jaw working. The well caved in while she was drawing water. Took 6 men to dig her out, and by then... "How do you bear it?" Cordelia whispered. "I don't." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I just keep breathing because stopping would dishonor their memory." She reached across the table impulsively, covering his scarred hand with her smaller one. "I'm going to survive this, Bronson. Whatever's happening here, whatever force or coincidence or curse you think is at work, I'm going to be the one who breaks it." He stared down at their joined hands for a long moment. "You don't understand the weight of what you're saying." "Can't lose another?" He stopped abruptly, pulling his hand away. "Just ... be careful, please." The emotion in that last word undid something in her chest. This giant of a man, this intimidating rancher who could probably wrestle bears for sport, was terrified of watching her die. The realization sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "Show me what needs doing," she said gently. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Bronson led her through the daily routines, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking the vegetable garden that had been neglected since the last housekeeper's death. He stayed close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him, close enough to catch her if she stumbled. "You're hovering," she observed as he shadowed her to the clothesline. "I'm being cautious. I'm hanging laundry, not wrestling wildcats." Constance was just hanging laundry when the snake struck. Cordelia turned to face him fully, placing her hands on her hips. "Bronson Thorne, if you follow me around like a nervous nursemaid, we'll both go mad within a week. I need space to work, and you have a ranch to run." He opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "You'll stay within sight of the house, I promise. And you'll call for me if anything seems wrong. Immediately." He nodded reluctantly and strode toward the barn, but she noticed he kept glancing back over his shoulder. Despite her brave words, Cordelia felt his absence like a physical thing. The ranch suddenly seemed larger, more isolated, full of shadows and potential threats. By noon, she'd made significant progress on the house. The kitchen gleamed, the parlor was dust-free, and she'd started on the mountain of mending that had accumulated. She was humming softly to herself when she heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. "Cordelia." Bronson's voice carried panic she'd never heard before. "Where are you?" "Kitchen." She rushed toward the sound of his voice, finding him in the hallway, his face pale beneath his tan. "Thank God." He sagged against the doorframe. "I heard screaming from the house." Cordelia frowned. "I've been humming, not screaming." His gray eyes searched her face desperately. "You're certain? No calls for help? No sounds of distress?" "Like that? Bronson, what's wrong?" But she could see what was wrong in the haunted expression that had returned to his features. The curse was already starting to work on his mind, making him hear threats where none existed, turning every ordinary sound into potential tragedy. "I'm fine," she said firmly, stepping closer. "I'm alive. I'm well. And I'm not going anywhere." Evening, they sat on the front porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Bronson had insisted on staying close to the house, abandoning his usual evening rounds to keep watch over her. The irony wasn't lost on Cordelia. She'd come here seeking employment and instead found herself with a giant guardian angel who jumped at every shadow. "Tell me about before," she said, settling into the wooden chair beside his. "Before the ranch? Before the curse? What were you like?" Bronson's scarred hand stilled on the beer bottle he'd been turning absently. "Why do you want to know?" "'Cause the man I see now is drowning in grief and guilt. I'd like to know who you were before life tried to break you." He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a wistful quality she hadn't heard before. "I was happier, I suppose. Dora used to say I laughed too much, talked too loud, dreamed too big. A ghost of a..." Smile touched his lips. "I inherited this place from my uncle when I was 25, full of grand plans. I was going to build an empire, raise champion horses, maybe run for territorial governor someday. What changed your mind about politics?" "These," he traced the scars on his face absently. "Got them in a range war 5 years ago. Cattlemen trying to drive out the smaller ranchers. Settle things with bullets instead of law. I chose the wrong side of a fight I thought was about justice." Cordelia studied his profile in the gathering dusk. "The right side, you mean?" "Ended up the same either way. Dead friends, burned barns, and a face that scares children." He took a long pull from his beer. Dora was the only one who looked at me afterward and didn't flinch. "I'm not flinching." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them in the space of a heartbeat. Bronson looked away first, his jaw tightening. "You should be. Everything I touch dies, Cordelia. Everyone I care about ends up in the ground." "That's not true, isn't it?" He stood abruptly, pacing to the porch railing. 7 women dead in 3 years. My best friend gunned down beside me in that range war. My parents taken by influenza the winter I bought this place. Hell, even my dog died of snakebite 2 months after I got him. The pain in his voice made her chest ache. She rose and moved to stand beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his massive frame. "You're not cursed, Bronson. Just a man who's had more than his share of loss." "Then explain the screaming I heard today. Explain the feeling I get every time you're out of my sight, like death is circling closer." Cordelia turned to face him fully. Your humming in your mind, tormented by grief and guilt, turned it into screaming. "The feeling you get is called caring about someone again, and it terrifies you because caring makes loss possible." His gray eyes searched her face in the fading light. "You think you have me figured out? I think you're a good man who's been alone with his ghosts too long." She reached up, her fingertips barely grazing the scars on his cheek. "And I think you're using this curse as an excuse to keep the world at arm's length." Bronson's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it against his face. For a moment, they stood frozen in that intimate tableau, her small hand cradled in his massive one. Their faces inches apart, the evening air thick with possibility. Then he stepped back abruptly, breaking the contact. "It's getting dark. You should go inside." But Cordelia didn't move. "What are you afraid of, Bronson? Watching you die?" The words came out raw, honest. Digging another grave, carrying another coffin, standing over another headstone with dirt under my fingernails and blood on my hands. "Or maybe," she said softly, "you're afraid of the opposite. Maybe you're afraid I'll live, and then you'll have to figure out how to be happy again." The truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, the way his breath caught. "Cordelia, I'm not going to die, Bronson. And neither are you, not inside where it matters." She moved closer again, emboldened by his vulnerability. "We're going to figure this out together. The ranch, the accidents, whatever's been happening here, we're going to solve it. And if you're wrong, if something happens to you, because I was selfish enough to let you stay?" She smiled, surprising them both. "Then at least I'll have spent my last days with a man who cared enough to try protecting me from the whole world." Bronson stared at her for a long moment, some internal battle playing out across his scarred features. Finally, he nodded slowly. "All right, we'll try it your way. But at the first sign of trouble, you'll be the first to know." She stood on her tiptoes and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek, just below the worst of his scars. "Thank you for letting me stay." As she headed toward the house, she heard him whisper behind her, "Thank you for wanting to." 3 weeks passed in a rhythm that began to feel almost normal. Cordelia threw herself into restoring the house with a determination that impressed. Even Bronson, scrubbing years of neglect from every surface, mending curtains and coaxing the garden back to life. Bronson, meanwhile, seemed to relax incrementally with each day she remained alive and unharmed. They developed routines that brought them together naturally: morning coffee shared in comfortable silence, evening meals where conversation flowed. Easier each day, moments on the porch where the space between their chairs grew steadily smaller. Cordelia caught herself watching for his return from the fields each afternoon, and noticed how his scarred face softened whenever he saw her safely at work in the house. But the curse hadn't finished with them yet. It started with small things. Tools that went missing and reappeared in dangerous places, a hammer balanced precariously on a high shelf, kitchen knives left blade up in drawers. Cordelia might have dismissed them as her own absent-mindedness, if not for the mornings she found her bedroom window wide open despite distinctly remembering latching it the night before. "Bronson," she said carefully over breakfast, "have you been in my room?" His coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "What? No, of course not. Why?" "My window was open this morning. I'm certain I closed it last night." The color drained from his face. Maybe the latch is broken. Old houses settle, windows stick, or come loose. But she could see the fear creeping back into his eyes, the familiar tension returning to his massive shoulders. That afternoon, she found him checking every lock in the house, testing every floorboard, examining every window frame with the methodical thoroughness of a man expecting disaster. "You're doing it again," she observed, finding him on his hands and knees, inspecting the front porch steps. "Doing what?" "Looking for ways I might die." He sat back on his heels, his gray eyes troubled. The accidents always started with small things. Isadora's handrail came loose before she fell. Millicent's saddle strap had been fraying for days before it broke. Cordelia knelt beside him, her skirts pooling around her. "Then maybe we need to stop thinking of them as accidents." "Do you mean 7 women, Bronson? 7? What are the odds that every single death was truly accidental?" His face went perfectly still. "You think someone's been ... deliberately ... I think someone has been very clever about making murders look like mishaps." She kept her voice calm despite the chill running down her spine. "Someone who knew each woman's routines, who had access to the ranch, who could sabotage equipment and create dangerous situations without being detected." Bronson surged to his feet, pacing the length of the porch like a caged animal. But who? And why? What could anyone possibly gain from killing housekeepers? Maybe it's not about the women at all. Cordelia rose more slowly, pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place in her mind. Maybe it's about driving you away from the ranch. It's making it impossible for you to keep help, forcing you to fail, to lose everything and leave. He stopped, pacing abruptly. "The bank. They've been pressuring me to sell for 2 years, ever since cattle prices dropped. But they'd never. Who else knows when you hire new help? Who else would benefit from your failure?" Bronson's scarred face had gone pale. "Jeremiah Crenshaw. He's the bank president, but he's also been buying up failed ranches throughout the territory, building some kind of cattle empire." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He offered to buy Thornfield last month for half what it's worth, and when you refused, he said he'd give me time to reconsider my position." Bronson's hands clenched into fists. "Son of a... if he's been murdering innocent women to steal my land." "We need proof," Cordelia said firmly. "Suspicion isn't enough." That night, they made their plans. Bronson would ride to town the next morning, ostensibly to buy supplies, but actually to ask careful questions about the timing of each accident. Meanwhile, Cordelia would search the property for any evidence of sabotage they might have missed. But as she lay in bed listening to the wind rattle her supposedly broken window latch, Cordelia couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. Somewhere in the darkness, she was certain, their enemy was preparing the next accident. She was proven right just after midnight when she woke to the acrid smell of smoke. The house was on fire. Cordelia rolled out of bed, her bare feet hitting the floor just as orange light began flickering under her door. Smoke was already filling the hallway, thick and choking. She grabbed her robe and stumbled toward the stairs, calling for Bronson. "He's not here," a familiar voice said behind her. She spun around to find Jeremiah Crenshaw standing in her bedroom. Doorway, his banker suit incongruous in the burning house. In his hand was a revolver pointed directly at her heart. "Rode out an hour ago, chasing shadows I planted." His thin smile was more terrifying than any weapon. "Amazing how easy it is to fake cattle thieves when you know the right people." "You're insane," Cordelia whispered. "I'm practical." "Thorne's ranch sits on the finest water rights in the territory. All I needed was to convince him it was cursed. Drive him to bankruptcy and buy it for pennies." His smile widened. 7 accidents weren't enough to break him, but watching his latest whore burn alive should finish the job. The fire was spreading rapidly, flames licking at the walls, smoke growing thicker by the moment. Cordelia's mind raced, calculating distances, weighing options. The stairs were blocked. The window was her only escape, but Crenshaw stood between her and freedom. "Such a shame," he continued conversationally. "Another tragic accident. Probably knocked over a lamp in her sleep. Bronson will know it was you. Bronson will be too destroyed by grief to think clearly. Without a witness, what can he prove?" Cordelia gathered her courage and took a step toward him. "There's just one problem with your plan, Mr. Crenshaw." "And what's that?" She smiled grimly. "I'm not the dying type." Cordelia lunged sideways just as Crenshaw pulled the trigger, the bullet splintering the doorframe where her head had been a heartbeat before. She rolled behind the bed as he cursed and adjusted his aim, the growing flames casting dancing shadows. That made targeting difficult. "You're only delaying the inevitable," he shouted over the roar of the fire. "The whole second floor will be engulfed in minutes." He was right. The smoke was getting thicker, the heat more intense. Cordelia's eyes watered as she pressed her robe against her nose and mouth, trying to filter the poisonous air. She had one advantage: she knew this house intimately after 3 weeks of cleaning every corner. While Crenshaw was navigating by firelight in an unfamiliar space. Moving silently, she crawled toward the washstand in the corner. Her fingers found the heavy ceramic pitcher she'd been using for her morning ablutions. Not much of a weapon against a gun, but better than nothing. "Come out, Miss Winters." Crenshaw's voice was getting hoarse from the smoke. "Make this easy on yourself." Instead, she grabbed the chamber pot from under the bed and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the far wall, and Crenshaw's gun barked twice in that direction. While he was distracted, Cordelia rose and threw the pitcher with all. Her strength had caught him in the temple with a wet thunk, and he staggered, the revolver spinning from his grip to clatter across the burning floorboards. Blood streamed down his face as he dropped to his knees, dazed. Cordelia didn't wait to see if he'd recover. She vaulted over the bed and dove for the gun, her fingers closing around the hot metal, just as Crenshaw's hand grabbed her ankle. "You little—" She kicked backward with her free foot, her heel connecting with his broken nose. He released her with a howl of pain, and she scrambled toward the window. The latch that had been mysteriously opening itself proved difficult now when she actually needed it, the metal warped by heat and swollen by humidity. Behind her, she could hear Crenshaw struggling to his feet, cursing her with language that would have made a sailor blush. The fire had reached the ceiling now, and burning debris was beginning to fall like snow. Finally, the latch gave way. Cordelia threw the window wide and looked down at the porch roof 8 feet below. Not an impossible drop, but dangerous in her bare feet and nightclothes. She swung one leg over the sill, just as Crenshaw's hands closed around her shoulders. "If I can't have this ranch, neither can he," snarled, trying to drag her back inside. Cordelia twisted in his grip, bringing the revolver up between them. "Let go of me, or I'll shoot. You don't have the spine." She pulled the trigger. The bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him away from her. He crashed into the burning dresser, and flaming debris cascaded over him. His screams turned to something inhuman as his expensive suit caught fire. Cordelia didn't watch him burn. She swung her other leg over the windowsill and dropped onto the porch roof, the impact driving her to her knees. Behind her, the entire second floor was now engulfed. Flames shooting through the roof into the night sky. She slid down the slanted roof and hung from the gutter for a moment before dropping the remaining distance to the ground. Her bare feet hit the dirt hard enough to jar her teeth. She was alive, she was free. And the man who'd murdered 7 innocent women was finally getting the justice he deserved. That's when she heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Bronson appeared out of the darkness like an avenging angel, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning house. He leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped and caught her in his arms, crushing her against his chest. Cordelia. Thank God. I saw the flames from 3 miles away. He pulled back to examine her face, his hands gentle despite their size. Are you hurt? I'm all right. She looked up at the inferno that had been their home. But Crenshaw. Crenshaw. Bronson's scarred face hardened. He's here. As if summoned by his name, a burning figure appeared at the second-story window. Jeremiah Crenshaw, his clothes and hair ablaze, stood swaying in the frame like a demon emerging from hell. His face was a mask of burns and rage, and somehow, impossibly, he'd found another gun. If I can't have it, he screamed, raising the weapon toward them. Nobody can. Bronson moved faster than any man his size had a right to, throwing Cordelia to the ground and covering her body with his own, just as Crenshaw fired his final shot. The bullet meant for her heart buried itself in Bronson's back instead. He grunted, but didn't cry out, his arms tightening protectively around her. Above them, Crenshaw finally succumbed to the flames, his body disappearing back into the burning house with a sound like a prayer being answered. Bronson! Cordelia struggled beneath his weight, feeling the warm wetness of blood soaking through his shirt. Your shot doesn't matter. His voice was strained, but determined. Had to keep you safe. As the house collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and embers, Cordelia held the man who'd risked everything to save her, and realized that sometimes curses broke not through cleverness or courage, but through love strong enough to face down death itself. The bullet had lodged in Bronson's shoulder blade, missing anything vital by inches. Dr. Fitzgerald summoned from town along with half the county when the fire lit up the night sky. Extracted it with minimal fuss, while Cordelia held Bronson's hand and tried not to faint at the sight of so much blood. You'll live, the elderly physician declared, bandaging the wound with practiced efficiency. Though you'll carry a reminder of this night for the rest of your days. Just another scar, Bronson said, though his face was pale with pain and blood. Loss. At least this one I earned protecting something precious. His gray eyes found Cordelia's, and the look that passed between them held promises that made her breath catch. The sheriff took their statements as dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the house. Jeremiah Crenshaw's body was found in what had been Cordelia's bedroom. Along with evidence of his guilt oil-soaked rags for starting the fire, a detailed map of the ranch with weak points marked, and a leather portfolio containing forged documents that would have transferred ownership of Thornfield to his bank upon Bronson's inevitable departure. Looks like he'd been planning this for years, Sheriff Morrison said, flipping through the papers. Got statements from 3 of his hired men willing to testify. He paid them to sabotage equipment and cause accidents. Guess they figured murder was too rich for their blood. As the officials departed and the neighbors who'd come to fight the fire drifted away, Bronson and Cordelia found themselves alone beside the ruins of what had been their home. The main structure was gone, reduced to blackened timbers and ash. But the barn, the outbuildings, and most importantly, the land itself remained intact. I'm sorry, Bronson said quietly, his uninjured arm wrapped around her waist as they surveyed the destruction. I brought you here to work in a house, and now... Now we build a new one. Cordelia leaned into his warmth, marveling at how natural it felt to be held by him. Together. He turned to look down at her, surprise and hope warring in his expression. Together? Well, you don't think I survived a curse? Solved 7 murders and escaped a burning building just to leave now, do you? She smiled up at him, her heart full despite the destruction around them. Besides, someone needs to help you spend that reward money the bank is paying for exposing Crenshaw's crimes. Cordelia. His voice was rough with emotion. Don't know how to do this. How to hope again. How to trust that happiness won't be snatched away. She reached up to trace the scars on his cheek. The marks that had once made him feel monstrous, but now seemed like evidence of his strength. We learn. Together, one day at a time, one choice at a time. If I wake up one morning terrified that I'm